All right, the gang is back. We're still working from home, but we have a number of good topics to talk about today. We're going to talk about one company that's finding a way to do just fine during the pandemic, but our golf course is faring as well. There might be foot traffic, but does that mean they're making money? This is episode number 37 of No Putts Given. Let's get it.
No Putts Given is powered by MyGolfSpy, the most extensive reviews in golf. Before you buy, MyGolfSpy. 9 million readers do it every year. Check us out.
All right, the gang is back. I'm here with all the guys, of course, in their hats per usual. We've got Adam, Tony, Chris, and Harry here. You're actually working from home this week instead of in the studio. So, Guys, welcome back. How are we doing?
Solid.
Yeah. Good to see you guys got the 7th graders on the bus headphone situation going on. I like that.
Yeah.
We're going back in time.
We'll have to see if we can find a headphone splitter.
You guys sharing that new Drake album? You guys listen to that one?
We're wiping them down so we don't get any earwax or ear infections, so we're good to go.
What did you listen to in 7th grade? I'm trying to think.
I was in nightclubs probably in 7th grade.
What boy band were you listening to over there?
Me? Oh.
No, Harry.
Probably Westlife. I think Westlife was pretty big. Blue or In Sync. I think there's another one. You don't know these people, all these bands.
Yeah,
nobody in America has heard of In Sync. That's, yeah.
Yeah, anyway, so golf stuff, guys. We, at the top of the show, mentioned a company that's finding a way to make it work through the pandemic. Adam, how is PXG doing? Because you talked to somebody on the inside that says they're having a great month.
First, they yesterday released a prototype driver that was priced below industry prices for non-prototype drivers, right? So they came out with at $495, what might be the next generation driver for PXG, but right now is a true prototype. They also have their driver right now, their current driver on sale for $295, which I don't think people know. A lot of people know that, but for those that do, a lot of people have obviously taken advantage of it. From what I've heard, they've had their best month so far. And that PXG pricing model during the pandemic seems to be something that they found kind of a sweet spot with, right? And I also think they have a distribution model advantage that allows them to do that over a lot of the other companies that rely on the retail distribution channel. Where there's something called MAP pricing, minimum advertised pricing. So more control of your own messaging, more control of your own pricing, more control of pretty much everything gives them an advantage, and similar to other companies smaller than them, like New Level Golf and some other things like that. So, yeah.
They definitely haven't lowered the prices on the wedges. The Mac Daddy that's Callaway.
Sugar Daddy.
Sugar Daddy.
Yeah. Harry's got so many daddies.
Too many daddies.
I can't keep track. That's $625 for one wedge.
Well, that's a little different. I mean, that is legitimately a very expensive wedge to make, especially from a time cost where you have a machine that has to take a solid block of steel and turn it into a golf club. So,
and then put about 32 weights into it.
But yeah, whatever, do the PXG thing with the weights too. That's interesting. But the distribution model piece is a massive advantage that I probably didn't really consider too much until I sat down and write the story about the prototype drivers. When you look at Callaway, Ping, TaylorMade, all of the guys that exist within the industry as it is, and how business is done within the golf equipment industry, it's heavily reliant on retail and more specifically even big box retailer. Like, you don't necessarily think about it or know about it, but the biggest seller of golf clubs in the country is Dick's Sporting Goods. That's where the most money is made selling golf clubs, and then it's Superstore, and it's a while before it trickles down to green grass. And so if a company, pick one, right? If Callaway decides that when they come out of this COVID-19 window and it's time to get aggressive in pricing, it's a massive strategy and a ton of considerations that go into navigating the retailers and working with retail pricing models and figuring out how to make up the difference in a driver that was supposed to sell for $500 that now sells for $400 or $350 or whatever that number ultimately ends up being. And every golf company is in a similar position with the big retail accounts and all retail accounts, where they have to kind of navigate the waters of timing price releases or price adjustments so that everybody has the same price at the same time and nothing is on sale for one guy and not another. And again, figuring out credits or cash back for all of this stuff. Whereas in a situation like PXG and New Level is one we mentioned too, because Eric Birch, the owner there, has done essentially the same thing. When you don't have major retail distribution, and even to an extent more so with PXG than even New Level, where custom fitting accounts like True Spec and Cool Clubs and TXG aren't necessarily a major driving force of your business, because you do your own fittings and you have your own fitting bands and your own retail locations. If you want to make a price change, you make a price change, and that's the end of it. Like, that's like, all right, we're going to lower prices, done. And there's nobody you have to give credit back to, or
not just that, but it's the whole experience, right? Like PXG is about giving an experience, and then you control the experience 100%, right? You don't have to rely on, let's say some pro shop carries your clubs and they have a fitter that might not be as good as you would want him to be for your brand, right?
Or
and
he's on staff for another brand. He's got a Titleist staff bag, and so that's kind of where.
Or he gets a spiff for selling some other brand, right?
Any number of reasons.
So let's say that you've built this brand, no matter what the 3 letters are on it or name of it is, and you expect a certain experience for your customers, and you hear that somebody bought a set of your clubs or one of your drivers from one of these retail places, and they got a poor experience. There's not much you can really do other than saying, hey guys, do a little better, right? So you're leaving up part of the experience that people have with your brand up to other people. And it's going to be really interesting coming out of this, what changes happen. PXG obviously is proving this model to be potentially successful. And I think the major OEMs were looking to do this anyway, but it was tough to disconnect all those places that they were plugged in. But I think you're going to see more of it coming out of this for sure.
Thing to keep in mind, there's in a typical retail conversation, there's so many people that have to be taken care of, right? So, the company has got to make a cut, and the retailer's got to take a cut. In a typical retail situation for a golf club, if you look at the list price on what your base margin is, I've seen it as low as 17 or 18% on paper. But by the time you actually get in inventory and volume discounts and other sort of motivating factors, if you will, come into play, typically retail is taking 30 to 40% of that price. Whereas if you're a PXG, if you're a New Level and you're and a sub 70, right, all of these guys that don't deal in typical retail,
it's all yours.
Margin goes into your pocket. 100%. And so you have the option if you choose to. And as we've seen here with PXG, they have chosen to lower prices, and who knows when they'll go back up or if they'll go back up. But you can still make money at that price when you're not giving up that 30 to 40%.
Well, just do the simple math. You got $1,000 set of irons or driver or whatever it is, right? If you have to get 30, 40 points to a retailer, that's 700, 600, right? Instead of you keeping all 1,000.
Do it a few thousand times.
Well, if you can keep all 1,000, you can lower prices to even 20% less than they were, and still you're making more money than you were selling it in a retail shop.
Well, the part that hit me too about this was, you think about it, what are the major brands, whether it's, Callaway, TaylorMade, Ping, et cetera, what are they not doing right now? Selling golf clubs, anything. And we know from some of our surveys, data, et cetera, how often does the average person buy a new set of irons, buy a new set of wedges, buy a new driver?
Every 4 years.
Every 4 years. So if I'm PXG, if I'm New Level, whatever, and I'm getting this motivated customer right now that's maybe waiting to see what these other companies are doing and saying, okay, even when they come out, is the deal going to get better? Because as soon as you see something on sale, a lot of critical consumers are going to say, well, maybe the prices will get a little bit better. Well, with PXG, New Level, et cetera, they know right now that those are pretty damn good prices. And what they're going to do, they're buying them and buying them and buying them. And they're not going to buy another driver in June or July or for the next 3 or 4 years. So you just captured a new customer that might become a customer again later on because of the constrictions that the typical retail channels have that you guys have already, kind of detailed.
The funniest thing I saw yesterday was somebody bitching about how cheap the prices were on PXG. And
they can't win. Like, it's too high. It's too low.
I mean, I was like, dude, what is wrong with the internet, man? I mean, damn. But anyway,
Yeah, I mean, from kind of like a do I buy, don't I buy? It's kind of an interesting psychological game that's being played, right? Because I think if you're at least the type of golf consumer who's listening to us, you are very, very aware that at some point the prices on the big guys stuff is going to drop and maybe significantly. So maybe you can get a Maverick for 400. Maybe you can get a Sim for 400, 350, whatever the number is. But you know for a fact right now you can get a PXG driver for under $300. And the ripple there is, and you don't know when that price is going to go back up.
Not only that, but what are the chances when everybody comes back out and plays that the price of other big manufacturers is going to be below $295? Not very high.
No,
you know?
Because again, it's tough to. I don't know that you can sell a Maverick, again using that as the example, or a Sim for $295 and have anybody do better than breaking even, and that very well could be the reality.
And look at the last 2, 3, 4 years. The best value driver in our most wanted testing is typically right at that $300 to $350 price point. And so you're seeing people reduce to that, and that gets to a whole nother dynamic around how do maybe some of these companies survive long term if prices do reduce.
How does Tour Edge make it through this when they have found that sweet spot for pricing, right? And that sweet spot was a sweet spot for a reason. No one was playing in that space, and it worked for them. Whatever they call it, pound for pound,
dollar for dollar,
dollar for dollar, pound for pound, whatever it is.
Dollar for yard, whatever the math is, right?
Redonkulong, whatever word you want to use. There's going to be other people playing that space. So how are those companies now? What sweet spot are they going to be able to find? Because now you go from being the only person playing in that arena to a lot of people in your sand pit,
And we look at, if you go back now, we tested the 0811X and 0811XF for the last 2 years. And, as we continue to do, we've evolved our metrics and looked at a few different things. But, certainly XF is right at the top of the table for forgiveness. It's, one of the 2 or 3, and depending on the metric you use, is easily number 1. 0811X, especially for higher swing speed players, we've seen is one that comes up quite a bit in our True Golf Fit stuff, which is, that's entirely automated. It's not like anybody's can pull a handle and get a result that they want, including us, really. And so, those drivers are really strong performers. And at $295, I never thought I'd say this, but I think PXG has the best value on the driver market right now.
Pound for pound?
Kaboom? Is that how? Is there a kaboom?
Oh boy!
Is that a thing? I don't know. Yeah, it's odd times, man. When like I said, if you can say PXG is the best value in golf, you're in a world. That's for sure.
Well, they created the pricing gap, and they're now filling the pricing gap. So there's a whole kind of cyclical thing going on here too. That's kind of interesting. But
I will say, and this is a legitimate point of the conversation with any deep discount. If 2 months ago I paid the full ride for any PXG product, and now it's significantly less than what I paid in a period of time, which could legitimately be measured in hours, I'd be pretty pissed off. And that's the one risk for the brand moving forward. We'll see.
Okay, so you guys just talked a bunch about PXG, but Chris, there was an article this week about Honma Golf. They're trying to figure out the North American market. I'm sure the pandemic isn't helping, but to what extent are they going to try to figure out how to get their clubs sold and popular in North America?
Yeah, and really this is one that we've been kind of tracing for quite some time. I think it was maybe, I don't know, Tony, what was it, 3-4 years ago? It seemed like the PGA show, the one question everybody was asking was, how are we going to figure out North America? And it makes a lot of sense because, right, North America, largest retail market in the world still. So if you want to be a brand experiencing global growth, you have to or want to try to play where, a majority of the money is. And so over time, we've seen different companies try to quote unquote figure out North America, and nobody's really cracked the code just yet. And John Barba wrote an awesome story this week kind of looking at Honma. Their platform's a little bit different, and I think what's kind of to me most intriguing about it is in order to, at least kind of where they're coming from, in order to really figure out North America, they have to give up some of what a lot of very traditional Japanese companies aren't willing to give up. Some of it's a pricing, and some of that comes back to the manufacturing part, right? Other than tour staff and maybe a very select few individuals, Honma clubs are designed, engineered, etc. in Japan, Sakata, but they're produced somewhere else, presumably China. Although I don't know the China part for a fact, but obviously someplace where manufacturing is a little bit less expensive. So you have this Japanese identity, background, history to leverage, but production isn't occurring there. So you have that combined with tour staff trying to figure out how to navigate that. From a retail standpoint, it's going to look a lot more, I guess, like PXG, where there's going to be mobile fitting vans. They're talking about 14 or so territories.
Can we talk about those for a minute? The mobile fitting vans? How does that work?
It's a model that I've taken to calling direct to consumer on wheels is effectively what it is.
So you're out at the golf course and this van pops up and comes and fits you for a home.
Yeah, so they set up a fitting day.
Yeah, you basically call it like an Uber and say, hey, Honma, I want to get fit. Come on out. And in a perfect scenario, it runs through the club professional, and he's able to get 2 or 3 or 4, however members he can get that are interested in trying and buying some Honma clubs. And you have kind of a little customized direct-to-order demo day, if you will.
Here's why it really works, too, from the retail standpoint, because this is probably going to be a theme throughout this year, too, is just how broken the traditional retail market is and how some of this is really exposing some of the shortcomings of that. But you think about this from the course perspective, what do they have to do? Not much. Right? They ring the register, and so they get a commission based on that and basically place the orders, etc. You treat it, like I said, kind of like an Uber situation, and maybe it's me, Tony, Harry. We say, hey, we'd like to get fit for these clubs. They send a person out. We head out there Saturday, get fit. They run the order through the club, and done. That's it. It's a low overhead model for the course. Distribution wise, it makes it a lot easier on there. And then Honma's controlling the fitting process. They're controlling the messaging, the experience that people are having from beginning to end. It's kind of this white glove service idea, and they're controlling every aspect of it. So smart idea going forward, I think.
The biggest thing I think that is going to be tough for Honma to break into the market in North America would be the pricing, because I don't think they're ever going to give up that pricing. And the fact that they had Justin Rose, and I have no idea what happened to Justin Rose, if he's still at Honma or if he's back somewhere else. I haven't paid that much close attention to it, but they need a little bit more presence on tour. And I know it's not been a proven model that tour players move the needle, but to get professionals on their staff might be a helping hand for them to break into the market.
It's an interesting situation. I mean, so Justin Rose was the guy, and that situation is still a little undefined, I guess, at the moment. But they do have several guys who are playing, a club or two here or there in play on tour. So it's tough to get publicity that way. But I think the two things I would say that Honma has done to break into North America that the other Japanese brands trying to come over here haven't is first, and John touched upon both of these things. The first is they're actually designing clubs for the North American golfer. Because typically what you find is the Japanese brands will come over here and present to the American market the same clubs that they sell in Japan. The specs are wildly different. The consumer is inherently looking for an entirely different product. And so basically what sells over there doesn't sell over here. And so you're starting already in a hole. And the other big thing they've done is hire people who already know the North American market.
Well, not just know the market, but have had major success in the market.
They've
defined the market.
Put it this way. When you hire somebody, right, idealistically, the best person you could hire is someone that has already done the job you're trying to hire for, but also done it successfully, right? And that's who they have there to do it.
Right. So it started with Mark King, who was in some respects the architect of the TaylorMade machine that dominated the industry for so long. He's now at Taco Bell and has thus far refused to bring back the chili cheese burrito.
Where's the Cholito at?
So Mark King, John Kawajo is a longtime TaylorMade guy who's now running the show at Honma. They brought in Chris McGinley, who's VP of marketing for Titleist for quite a run there as well. So these are guys that know how to produce, market, and sell golf clubs in North America. So I think if you're going to look at any of the Japanese brands and go, all right, which one has a chance? This is a situation where finally one has emerged from the pack to the point where you can go, yeah, That's the one I think I believe in, because if you look at all those brands you profiled, and you can run down the list, 2 or 3 years ago, how many of them are we still talking about?
Well,
Zero.
The TR20, right? That's the first complete line designed by the American design team, right? And no doubt it's already experiencing a lot of success. And like I said, the Justin Rose thing, we'll see kind of where that happens. From what I'm chatting with people at Honma, it's still in a legal conversation, or kind of a legal purgatory, if you will.
But let's be, Chris, be honest with you. Let's project 5 years from now. I don't give a damn if they have Justin Rose or not. That doesn't matter to me, So like, move on, who cares what Justin Rose is going to do with home? He's not going to be the person that makes this happen or not happen moving forward, in my opinion. But it already looks bad right now. So just drop the guy and move forward, right? Because it's not a good optical situation going on right now.
That's true, right? And that's not to say everybody's going to believe the truth when it comes out, whatever it happens to be. But the longer that it drags, the more people who are aware that Justin Rose plays Honma are thinking, well, Justin Rose isn't playing Honma. The only reasonable conclusion that comes from that is that the clubs aren't very good.
If people aren't thinking Justin Rose is playing the clubs because they make him better and hopefully win more tournaments, then he doesn't have a whole lot of value for you perceptually.
Here's perhaps an obvious question. Harry, how'd they do in the driver tests this year?
So.
Good.
He did pretty well.
I would argue better than so. At least one of the models was top 5.
Yeah, they were 4th.
No, I'm thinking of the X.
So again, essentially the Japanese spec club.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So their first club, designed, engineered, sold for the North American market, was 4th. And again, you flip 2-3 yards here, there, whatever. Could have been second, could have been first. Interesting enough, when I did True Golf Fit, it was my number 1 selection. That and the Titleist TS4. And I think it's a sleeper. In any other year with a normal retail cycle, I think TR20 would be kind of that, for me, that kind of sleeper award, because people aren't thinking about Japanese companies. And specifically when people do, they tend to associate forged irons, players cavity back, wedges, etc. When's the last time anybody ever really thought about a metal wood from a Japanese company, maybe other than like Royal Collection turning into Sonar Tech or something like that? Man. Folks. When's the last time you thought of a Japanese company and going, oh man, that driver is hot?
All right, well, let me back up for you, little Chris. Like, was the True Golf Fit you did pre-super speed or post-super speed?
Pre-roast beef bag number 3.
So we're gonna have to give you a free fitting to see what you got now.
But back to the idea of the North America piece and Japanese companies. Take a company like Miura, right? We know they're under the 8 a.m. umbrella with Golf Magazine, Golf.com, Nicholas Companies, right? The list goes on and on, Golf Logics, etc. In some ways, they have their own kind of unique status and separate standing because they're under that umbrella. And in some ways, they'll exist however Howard Milstein and wants them to exist, right? So they're not as market determined. They're in a different market than a Honma, I think.
We've said they've never had a metal wood that not even move the needle, but it was like, for being brutally honest, right, was even really interesting within the North American market.
Miura's never had a driver worth a damn, No,
and
But back to Tony and Harry's point, like, if you wanted to start a company, right, and you were an American or whatever, and you wanted it to start for the first day 1, your business starts, but it's a Japanese business, but you're running it from here. There's just things and traditions over there that are different. The likelihood of your success is limited and diminished by you not knowing that market, right? So, and that's generally speaking how all the Japanese companies tried to start figuring out North America. And that's setting yourself up probably for failure out of the gate. And I think Honma is at least setting themselves up for potential success.
Honma is the TR20 did well in the test, and that was based on American designers, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So there you go. It's another piece of the pie that they need to keep on with that.
And their wedge, I don't know who designed their wedge, but their wedge won our wedge test last year.
Yeah, it was deep. It's good.
Another sleeper.
I was going to say another sleeper and another piece coming up as we learn more about how they're going to have the custom wedge program and Jacob Wedge Wizard Sanborn and kind of what that's going to look like. Doing some very North American, things that are going to really cater to North American buyers. I think the last thing I want to say on this, because this is interesting too, is in order for a Japanese company to successfully navigate, I think, in North America, it's going to have to give up some of the things that are very traditionally Japanese. And so
True.
Again, it's one of those conflicting kind of like cognitive dissonance things where people that are really like hardcore JDM fans are probably going to look down, if they're not already, a little bit at Honma as being less authentically Japanese because of some of the sacrifices they need to make in order to be successful where they know they want to be successful.
Totally well put.
Looking for some education here. Why would a club need to be different in an American and a Japanese market?
I'll give you a couple examples. One from a aesthetic standpoint and one from an actual design standpoint. So typically, from an aesthetic standpoint, Chris would know this too, since he and I both kind of dabbled in that market for a long time. Let's say you take a popular putter design or a head cover design from an aesthetic standpoint, and it moves the needle really well in America. You put it out over there and they go, what is that?
I can understand aesthetics.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
All right, from a design standpoint, typically that market is shorter and slower swing speed. So even everything from lie angles to the weights of the clubs to the shafts to the loft all have to be made slightly different for different type of golfer, right?
Okay.
The other part is you have to look at culturally what happens. And I learned, a lot about this. Like I said, studying the Japanese market and talking to people and understanding that the role that golf plays as a traditional cultural event is different in Japan than it is in the United States. And maybe the way that Americans might see a car or a house as a status symbol, a lot of traditional Japanese would see golf clubs as a status symbol. And that's why with the Honma part of what's very interesting to me too is, people see that $75,000 price tag that we put in there because, Honma bears 5-star line, or they think of maybe the club that, Shinzo Abe gave to President Trump, a couple of years ago, whatever, is $3,500 driver. Because it's a status symbol, it's a Rolex, it's a Ferrari, it's a house in the right area with a 5-car garage. If something isn't expensive enough, people aren't going to purchase it.
One of my favorite stories was the PGA show.
I was hoping you'd go with this.
I was waiting for this.
So I don't know if it was my first year there or not, but there was a new putter company on the scene. And back then at the PGA show, just for those that haven't been there, the putting corral was huge back then. It was amazing, right? It's not that anymore, but back then it was. And the guy was setting up his new putter company. No one had ever heard of this guy, right? And he had a nice little booth, and he was setting up all his putters. And some of them were limited edition, some of them were custom stamped, all this. And there was a Japanese buyer that came by pre-show opening. So this was like just me and maybe 100 other people walking the show floor. And he comes up and he goes, I'll buy them all. And the guy was like, what do you mean? He's like, I want them all. And he's like, well, okay. And the guy goes, how much are they? And he said, $295. And literally the guy did not say another word. He walked off. And the guy that owned the putter company was like, whoa. Like, wait a second, come back. How did that just go from you wanting them all to not wanting them at all and walking off and not saying another word? He goes, my buyer doesn't want a $295 putter. It wants a $1,000 putter. See you later. And that was it. That guy lost all those sales because the Japanese market for limited edition looks at $295 putters as a joke,
Like there's something wrong with it. Like you go into the parking lot and you see a brand new Mercedes-Benz S-Class for $40,000. You're going, what's wrong with this? I ain't paying that.
Yeah.
They need to see the price tag that makes sense. So there's a cultural piece there too, Miranda, I think, in terms of what makes them different. Yeah, generally more forgiving clubs, more offset, different lie angles, softer shafts.
Everything Americans hate.
Everything Americans
Sounds
hate,
pretty
right?
opposite, yeah.
It is. So it's literally flipping it on its head from a design perspective a lot of the time. So they really are fundamentally very different buyers.
I don't know why we didn't really lean on Tony for this. I mean, Tony lived in Japan, was a Japanese model, and we totally excluded him from the Japanese section of this part of the podcast.
But I was really, really, really young there, so I didn't play much or any golf or barely walk for that matter. Just
We forgot about the Japanese eye candy, man.
I was going to say, is that a different philosophy as well? Do you have to strike different poses for the Japanese market than an American market?
I've never done any modeling over here, if you can believe that. So
Don't lie.
Well, I have the pose that he struck for that first magazine, so we can definitely have.
How old were you?
You're going to see it right here.
Like
couple
5,
weeks.
maybe.
It's going to be right there.
5?
Yeah. I was hoping to do some work at JCPenney's, but that doesn't look like
One
it's
of
going to pay.
One of them kind of deals.
Tony, I do have some BallLab questions for you. I know you've had another week in the BallLab, right? So from what I'm hearing, we have a better understanding of some of the consistencies in the ball industry, right?
Yeah, it's just continually an interesting thing to watch. So we started roughly 60 dozen on order, and just kind of as they sourcing them from different places, they're coming in at different times. So I essentially put the first dozen of each in the incubator, get the environmental conditions right for where we want to measure them, and take them out, measure them, and lather, rinse, repeat. And so now we're getting into the second, and in some cases even third dozens of these balls, and it's interesting to see kind of differences in every specification, not only within a box but within the variation between box and box. So we're seeing things like that where in some cases across 2 dozen the compression range is maybe 4 points, 4 to 5 points, so really tight, and then in other cases it's like 12. So you're like, all right, so now we're moving into territory where you could legitimately say some of these balls are different than others.
Are you finding that you're having new standards for what's good and what's bad? Are you adjusting those?
So that's a really good question, because it's one of these things where, like, it's why we decided to measure a whole bunch of balls and not just go, all right, we're gonna test this ball and write it up, because we had no way to really quantify what is good, what is bad, what does average look like. Mm-hmm. And so in testing these balls, I kind of developed, it was kind of back and forth between the gauges and the larger picture, and starting to get a sense of, what the threshold was like on a dial gauge between a seam measurement and the pole measurement. What's the difference between the two before you say that ball isn't round? And so I came up with a number. I've reached out to the 5 leaders in the ball market right now. One of them has gotten back to me. My number was exceptionally close to theirs. I was maybe a little less forgiving than they are. And I do mean, it's honestly a difference between 0.005 and 0.006. That's those are the small numbers we're working with. So I have that open question out to the industry and saying, all right, how would you define round in terms of a measurable number? So I'm expecting more will get back to me. I'm expecting conversations will come out of that. And I'm doing the same thing with similar questions around the conformity of the ball. So
for your purposes, are you saying that round is conforming? Because again, this is sort of where I say, well, isn't round? Isn't that just a mathematical kind of thing?
It's either round or not round.
Okay.
So that's not really, technically a golf ball is supposed to be symmetrical.
Right.
But there's wiggle room in that definition. Conforming is a size, like it has a minimum diameter of 1.68 inches, and there's a ring gauge test you can use. And I'm finding the occasional ball that is too small. I wouldn't say it's prevalent, but it's certainly more common than I would have thought.
All right. So we learned a couple things last week, right? And then this week, we obviously you and I talk every day. So what are some things that you learned this week about golf balls that you think would be interesting to golfers?
Yeah, so I mean, again, the consistency from box to box, and we'll see more about it. It's more like kind of the eye-popping moments that kind of happen through a test. So you find balls where the weights are all over the map, right? You typically, again, there's a weight standard for a golf ball, and usually if a ball is under that weight, which is perfectly fine, they're all relatively consistent. But every now and then you find a box where it's like this, and you look at the sizes of those balls, and it's like this. So the golf balls within a box aren't the same size, and that has legitimate performance implications.
Are we looking at big name brands? I'm guessing it's the lower name brands that you have seen these inconsistencies in.
I would say there's a correlation with the bigger brands, especially between cost and quality. Consistency and quality. So going into this, and I guess if you're asking, kind of an interesting find for me, and my definition of interesting may not be the same as somebody else's, but my assumption was a 2-piece ionomer cover ball was probably going to be more consistent, because again, it's just a core and a cover, and if you make that core round and put a cover on it, you're going to be in pretty good shape. And it's just not proven to be the case.
Would it be safe to say that it's really hard to make 12 golf balls in a dozen that are actually consistent?
it sure seems to be hard to make 12.
Why
balls.
though?
Again,
That's what I don't understand. With
Because-
all the technology that we have today, why is it
that's
hard
the
to get a
reason.
production line?
You're pumping out millions and millions of golf balls a day.
It's materials, it's process, it's price, and it's also just the fact that golfers have never even cared, right?
That's it.
So like
it's the
noticed
last one,
challenged
because
it.
who's ever done this? Who's ever tested it to this degree with this level of a microscope and been willing to test all the balls across the industry?
People have been willing to do it, but those were the people making the balls, and they damn sure weren't willing to tell the golfers what they were finding.
I guess
there's
that's the point.
And if you talk to anybody quietly, even pick a leading brand, they'll tell you, yeah, we have an excellent quality control standard, but yeah, occasionally we get balls slipped through that aren't round, and I'm sure they tell you, yeah, we get some that slip through that are undersized, but it's
But when it's like
basically a
half and
frequency
half,
thing.
it's kind of crazy.
It's a frequency thing, and I have found a box of balls from a brand everybody listening to this would recognize, where by the standard provided by the one manufacturer I've spoken with so far, 5 of the balls within the dozen were not round.
Is that like a noticeable to the eye, or is it with the small gauges where you're doing it? I mean, but
some
can
of
it
it
affect the flight? Obviously,
some of it. Well, it's everything impacts a flight to some degree, right? Like,
well, if you hit an egg with a wedge, I don't think it's going to fly the same as a circle.
I get that, but is it big enough to get to that point?
At some point, it's the difference between the ball that falls in the hole and burns the edge, right? Even that most minute detail, but yeah. So a lot of the times you don't see it, which is probably why it is the way it is. But I was measuring a ball the other night, and the specifications, again, you're not, I'm not laser scanning the entire surface of the ball. You're taking a 3-point measurement. So I'm getting a diameter at 2 points on the seam and then 1 on the pole. And so, most of the time that's going to give you that's where you're likely to see the variation. But we also do a visual inspection for each ball. I'm looking for things like, are the stamps clean, right? Is there any smearing, anything that would, on tour anyway, make this ball not conforming? And you're looking for, are there scuffs, things where it didn't come out of a machine the right way? Are there kind of things hanging off or dimples that have like mold remnants, anything that's essentially not supposed to be there? So I'm doing a visual inspection, kind of rolling it around, and it's a tactile kind of thing in some respects, where you're trying to feel a texture that shouldn't be there. And I'm rolling it around, and I'm like, what is that? And so I'm like, because it feels like there's a bump on the ball. So I go back and I look at my 3.
You had a ball zit.
Right. Yeah. And so I'm looking at my 3 measurements on the gauge, and everything from those 3 points, it looks good. And I'm like, well, if I remember correctly, the average diameter of that was like 1.579 was about what I was getting, which is typical. So everything is usually right around a little below the USGA standard, and then through the magic of rounding, you get to conforming.
Get to the zit.
I know you want to get to the zit. So basically the numbers I had were everything you would expect. So again, 1.67 is the number to keep in mind. And I'm rolling it around, and I get to 1.6885, which is, again, this sounds like a small number, but in terms of a diameter on a golf ball, it's a hump. A hump on a solid core golf ball that is in a box that we purchased at retail.
You had a whitehead.
Yeah. So I'm like, all right. And so what I do in this case, I'm like, all right, let me mark it as precisely as I can where this thing is. And when we get to the point where we're cutting these balls, it's going to be interesting to see if that hump is then visible in the cross section. If it kind
all right. So what I want to know, and I'm sure everybody else wants to know, is this though. We tested a Chrome Soft, obviously last year. It did not do well. We then cut them open. We did a lot of other inspections. They did not do well. Have you started to test the new Chrome Softs that they say are, it's the new ball that changed that ball?
So I'm 1 dozen in plus a visual on the second dozen. Okay. So we haven't cut them yet, and I think that's probably going to be the most interesting. I would say from the first dozen, and I've talked to Callaway about this, and to some extent, I'll explain this in a second. It's expected. So versus say a Titleist or a Bridgestone, the compression range within a box of Callaway Chrome Softs is wider. That I can say with reasonable certainty. I would expect that to carry over as I measure more and more of those.
And when you say compression, that will equate to how many yardage if it was...
Well, it's the firmness of the ball, and there is a correlation with speed to a degree. Now, what Callaway has told me is that they expect that they're going to have a wider compression range, but that they're kind of tweaking their formula, right? So depending on the environmental conditions, for example, at the time, they tweak the formula of the rubber. And so while you get a wider range in compression, you actually get a tighter range in the actual COR of the golf ball. Now, I don't know if this is true. This is something we can test down the road when we get into, because COR should translate to speed. So that's something you can either look at with a ball cannon or a robot. But yeah, so that compression is wider for sure. And I did find one as well. And again, single sample. So not to pick on Callaway, because I found a single sample of somebody else's ball, which had a bump on it, and a single sample of somebody else's ball that had a flat spot, and multiple samples of lots of different companies' balls that were non-conforming for size. But getting back to Chrome Soft, I did find one where it basically looked like a fingernail imprint in a dimple pattern. So
here's my question though, is if we're finding, if we can establish enough, data and information that says, okay, out of 12 balls, with these different manufacturers, here's the number of golf balls that are going to be conforming, round, etc. How many golf balls do I actually need to buy in order to get a dozen solid balls? So
that's exactly what the product I want to come out of this is to say, look, all right, you have a golf ball that sells for $39.99 a dozen, right? It's kind of the upper end of the.
What does that dozen actually cost you?
Yeah. So, all right, what's your per ball cost? And we're brutally honest, still again working with manufacturers to help us define this. But how much do you actually have to spend to get 12 balls that are the same, or reasonably close to the same, or yeah? All
right. So, Chris, to your question, basically. Ultimately, right now we are learning, right? So we're in the educating, the curiosity part of our own process to some degree. We know a lot, but we're learning more. And then once we go to the letting the consumer know what we found, what that's going to look like for consumers, we're not 100% sure yet, but there will be ball reports. So there will be individual ball reports, we think. I also think it would be cool to do head-to-head. So let's take two brands like a Titleist Pro V, where it's their flagship ball, and the Callaway Chrome Soft, which is, they're going to be their flagship ball. And let's put them head to head and see how they stack up from a quality and consistency standpoint. And I also think it would be interesting to potentially take whole brands and show you, hey, here's all of Titleist balls from the top tier to the bottom tier, and you can just look at them all side by side. And if you guys out there listening, or girls out there listening, have ideas of what you would like us to do, we're all ears right now. Now is the time to get the input. But we definitely think that the head-to-head stuff, the individual stuff, and the brand stuff would be things that you would be interested in. If there's other things, like I said, we're listening for sure.
Yeah, I love the idea of the adjusted cost metric, because if you have that one where, let's say it takes me 18 balls to get 12 that are within reason, that's 50% more expensive. All of a sudden, it's $40 a dozen. It's really a cost of $60 now. And how does that equate? How might that shift people's perceptions around just buying a ball versus buying a quality ball?
At the end of the day, they shouldn't be inspecting their own balls. It should be good. It should be round, and it should be the same consistency throughout. It shouldn't be.
Well, there's a level of tolerance that's allowed in anything that's manufactured, right?
Yeah, but not like 10 to 20 yards.
It's funny. Tony and I were just talking about this, right? There are balls, I can't remember if this is reversed or what, but there are balls out there that were really firm or firmer that are saying they're super soft on their packaging, right?
That's a great one. So, and again, it's all marketing, right? So you can say whatever you want, right? Soft feel. There's no industry standard or anybody's definition to quantify soft. And so I'm measuring these balls, and on the low end, the softest ball we've measured so far is a Callaway Super Soft. I think the lowest number I've had on an individual ball is plus or minus 35 compression. And there's another ball that I've measured where the average compression, I think I told you, is 83. And the company selling it promotes that it offers soft feel. And by a tour ball standard, I suppose you could say that an 83 compression ball is soft by that standard, but it's not a soft ball.
But the point I'm trying to make to what Harry said is if there are no standards for calling soft or hard or this or that or whatever, right? What are the standards for tolerances for ball? There is no set of standards. So to some degree, MyGolfSpy and Tony's BallLab and Find It, Cut It, and all these things we've done are starting to define, hopefully, those things for the golf ball industry, because left to their own accord, I don't think they're going to set a standard for this. They don't need to, you know?
Why would they?
I think it's, reasonable expectations. I don't think any manufacturer would tell you 100% of our balls that make it onto shelves are round, or 100% are
Strixon said that 100% of their balls are
centered.
Dead
cores
center.
were centered, and we know that wasn't true.
Correct.
We found a couple, so there's always a couple. You know, we're not throwing names on things right now for the most part, because again, we want to make sure that when we talk to a variety of industry guys, that there's some reasonable range of agreement on how to define these things. But using the measurements that I have been given, I found a box of balls that a lot of our readers love. I know, because it keeps getting commented on. Sells, I think, for around $30 a dozen, and in 2 boxes, so 24 balls, I've found at least 9 or 10. I could go back and tell you 9 or 10 of them not round out of 2 dozen. So that's, I mean, if I find 2 out of 1 or 2, or one, ideally 1 or 2 out of the 3 dozen that we plan to measure initially.
Yeah, that's acceptable.
I think that would be reasonable. But if we're encroaching on 30-40%, that to me is a problem. Like that.
Well, that to me is like a little bit of a con. You're literally taking advantage of the consumer, and at that point,
think about it too. So before any of this happened, there was never a time that I remember hitting a golf ball, and you guys tell me what you think. But before the ball test and Find It, Cut It, and all this stuff, and you play golf, had you ever hit a golf ball and hit a bad shot and went other than a cut ball, meaning a ball that had like a smiley face in it, right? Said that was potentially the golf ball's fault, not mine?
I saw it once, and it wasn't me. I was actually playing with Sam Saunders, Arnie's grandson. He used to live out here in Fort Collins, and name dropping, sure, whatever. Yeah,
humble brag.
100%, not even. Yeah, it was awesome. But playing a hole, and he hits a drive, and the ball just takes like a right hand turn and did something really weird, and it went over a fence, and he had me go get the ball. So that he could send it back. So he could send it back. He did. And I was like, sir, you got it. And I did. He's like, I'm like, what do you want that for? He's like, I'm sending it back to him because there's something wrong with this ball. It's the only time I've ever seen somebody do it. I never have, but.
Well, point being, the bigger point is that I don't think golfers generally blame their bad shots on golf balls. So golf balls could get away theoretically with almost anything quality control wise, because golfers, for most of us, suck at golf, right? When most of us shoot 100, right? And we slice it and hook it and plunk it and thin it and shank it and whatever.
Even a ball with a hump, you're going to probably, if that's in a box you bought, going to lose it before you find it or notice it. So
part of the responsibility of MyGolfSpy is to be a checks and balances for the golf industry that has never had one before in my time being in the golf industry. Supposedly there was a magazine years ago called Peterson's Golfing that came somewhat close to the standard, but I had never heard about it prior to starting MyGolfSpy. And that's really part of the role of MyGolfSpy. From a journalistic standpoint, a testing standpoint, it's to have some checks and balances so that consumers can trust the products they buy,
This all started, the golf ball piece of it, when we did the ball test, where there were just a handful of moments, and a moment in a ball test, I guess you could say, is a shot where you just look at what happened and you're like, what the it cannot be explained, because you have this robot that is, because you can go back and you can look at what the robot did and how much force was applied, and you can look at the launch conditions, and there's always one number that was just not right, and you're like, how does that happen? And so this is BallLab is taking that, like, how does this happen, right? The confusion that we experienced to a degree, and being able to explain, yeah, this is how it happens. This is why we saw what we saw in the ball test. This is why you may see some of the things you see if you're looking for it. And now, yeah, let's actually tell you where we think you should spend your money, or at least give you the best information, the most information we possibly can, so that you can make an informed decision based on something other than, well, I think this feels good, or so-and-so plays this on tour, so it must be good.
Once we get this out the way, I think we should go on the tour and then figure out if those balls are the same that they're doing and how inconsistent they are, or
We
how
have
consistent-
some of those
Oh,
balls
here we
in
go.
for testing.
All right, yeah. So let me. I'll throw this out here too, and I don't know how much I'm going to do with it because in my own estimation, I don't have the sample size that I would like to be sure. So I was able to obtain a sleeve of 3 balls directly from a tour player. And I have compared them to the same ball that we purchased at retail, identical in every way, same side stamp, etc. And again, there are lots of reasons that a variance could occur, which is why I'd like to take more. That's my disclaimer here. But apart from the fact that I would say that 2 balls in the sleeve I'm confident in saying I would deem them non-conforming for size anyway. 2 out of the 3 small, they fail the track method that the USGA uses, which is part of what we do as well. But in addition to that, the 3 balls in the sleeve were across the board 5 compression points firmer than what we were seeing at retail. So
what I can do is I can volunteer as tribute on every tour event and be the kid on the side and say, hey, can you give me my ball, please? And sign my hat as well.
Well, we
I
could
can
just
be
say
that guy.
this. I mean, we could say this. If you know any tour pros out there that would want to participate, or if you are a tour pro listening and would want to participate and anonymously send your balls in, our information to where to send it to is on the contact form of MyGolfSpy, and we'd love to test more of them, you know?
yeah, and again, I want to be very clear on this at this point. Like it's a small sample size, and 5 compression points is possibly within the range that could happen with age and environmental conditions and things like that. But that they were consistently 5% compression points higher is certainly enough to make me go And so when we get to the point where we're cutting things open, you can bet I'm going to cut the retail and the tour open and see. You know, if there's anything that's visually different, or if it, like I said, you know, just one of those things that can be different because of production.
So we're going to check
Malfeasance.
back in with you next week and see what progress you've made in just the week between now and then. But on to one of our more important topics of the day. Everyone is noting how golf courses are packed. It seems like a lot of people are out playing. But what we're finding is that's not necessarily correlating to building revenue. They're not bringing in money.
Yeah, and again, this probably depends on the regulations in place at a given state right now and things like that, and to an extent the climate of an area in general. But I can speak to what we're seeing here locally, where a lot of courses don't have carts. So you kind of think of every place that a public, I mean, if you're private, you might have a little ability to sustain through this because guys are paid up. But just the timing of this, especially in the Northeast, is kind of a window where guys either had or hadn't paid their membership dues for the year. And a lot of us haven't, myself included. I haven't joined this year because projecting the landscape, I'm like, I just don't know how much golf there is to be played. So you have situations where you may be relying on public foot traffic when you may not have been as much because your members haven't all come back. My club, from what I understand, is down upwards of 70 members, I believe, that haven't come back this year. And again, most of that just being COVID related. We're not running golf carts right now. So cart revenue, which can be a massive part of the revenue stream for a course, isn't coming in. There's no pro shop revenue coming in. The restaurant is effectively closed. You're doing takeout, or my club's doing takeout 4 nights a week, but there's no lunch service. Most importantly, there's no post-round beverage service. So there's a lot of money that you would typically get coming in that isn't. Tournaments have been canceled. And again, I think this is probably going to be true for a lot of courses in a similar situation where you can't stop taking care of the courses. So you're paying your grounds crew, and you have to keep your management teams in place to an extent. So you have to keep paying a lot of people to be open to golfers if you're going to have your golfers on the course. But in terms of, generating revenue like you would in a normal year, it's going to be a struggle, and I don't know how you make that up.
I mean, it's simple math, right? You take a big pie and you look at all the revenue generators that fill up that piece of pie. And right now, you see a lot of people playing golf, which tee times is part of that pie, but it's definitely not the whole pie. And the rest of that pie has been eaten up, you know? And in
some cases, it's reduced cost tee times because you sort of want to entice the guys who would otherwise want to take a cart. And you are losing a lot of those guys too.
Why can't they do 1 to a cart? That's what they're doing down here.
That's what we're doing.
Again, it varies state to state. even one in a cart, like I've said, I'll be brutally honest. I would not trust the cart kids to provide the hospital grade sanitation.
That still doesn't solve the problem of the food and the alcohol and all the other stuff that generated money for you, income for you. They are no longer generating income. So optically, a golf course can look like it's rolling, man. It's packed, right? I mean, I just talked to a guy right before the podcast. He was like, took 4 hours to play 9 holes yesterday. It was that packed.
Oh.
And so he is like, man, golf is doing great. I don't know. I think there's going to be some golf courses that don't survive this coming out of this because they were already struggling.
A lot of it's going to be regional and how each state is doing and how much of a course's revenue is dependent on not necessarily the food portion, but certainly the beverage portion, right? The post-round drinks, that adds up over the course of the season. Outside play, tournament play, especially when tournaments for a lot of courses are the single biggest line item in a given year. And if you're canceled through June, July, and potentially August and beyond, like the more that drags, I mean, that's money you can't make up. There's no way to get that back later, especially if, you've got a hard stop when the snow falls.
Yeah, and I think you have to look at each of those slices of the pie, like Adam was saying, and understand what type of indicator it is. Is it a positive indicator, a negative indicator? Is it a true indicator, like an authentic one, or a false indicator? And part of the problem with the carts, like at our course, we do the single rider thing right now. So every cart, you can have one rider in it, unless there's family members, or if you have like take my daughters out, they can ride with me. But when you establish a fleet for a course, they're basing that on 1.7, 1.8 riders per cart. It's not always going to be 2. It's not always going to be 1. It's going to be somewhere in between there. Nobody did those projections based on a maximum of 1. And so they're running out of carts 10:30, 11, 12 o'clock during a super busy day. It's not like they can then generate that revenue in the afternoon in some other fashion. You have people that otherwise would be paying to use a cart that there's no cart for them to even pay for. So it looks good. It looks like, man, the course is packed. All the carts are gone. But the reality is there's a bit of a false indicator going on there as well.
Is there anything that courses, in your opinions, can do to try to save themselves? Or are we just looking at the end of this potentially losing some courses until things get back on track?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I don't know. I think this is money you can't make up, and every course has bills to pay. Things like that don't go away, as we know. And so, and again, even with a golf course, right, when you talk about something like the PPP program, maybe you keep your employees, but that doesn't give you the revenue you would get from the services you're not able to offer right now. So again, another one I failed to mention, pool memberships. If a club does pool memberships on the side, like is that going to happen? It doesn't look like it will anytime soon. So I think we've talked about the retail side, where we're seeing a reinvention of what retail golf could look like as people adapt to this. And you may see similar situations where private clubs or semi-private clubs have to go fully public or something like that. Offer different services down the road to, as much as you can, if not recuperate the money, create new revenue streams that backfill as best they can. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like is this where
we put a call out to say, I know we're doing our best to support our local businesses. If you eat takeout, try to make it a local place. Don't forget about the restaurants at your clubs or the pro shop. But don't forget to
that's the thing is that
influx some revenue there.
The clubs that are still open, the membership clubs, you still have a monthly due to hit. For some clubs have a monthly membership where you have to hit a food minimum. So they're still going in there, but 9 times out of 10 you'll go past that minimum anyway. They're still going to recoup some of that money, because even if you don't go there and eat, they're still going to charge you for the minimum that you did.
I think it's probably club dependent how everyone's handling it. But
I was going to say,
I think we've totally forgotten though about non-clubs, meaning like the majority of golf courses are municipal courses where dudes are wearing blue jeans to go play golf. Yeah, I mean that is the heart of golf.
All right.
So that's, I think, to answer your question, Miranda, I think there's going to be different answers depending on what the ownership or management structure of the course is like. If we're talking about municipal courses, city-run courses, entirely public courses, those answers are going to differ. And some of it may be how that city feels about golf and what that looks like. And maybe they change things so the pass works for 3 or 4 courses in an area as opposed to
I'll give
just
you
one
an
or
example
2.
About that. There's a local municipal course that they were in talks with working with us about some projects on, and the city town is not interested in spending a single dollar over what they are already spending having that golf course here. If anything, they're looking for every way to cut. I mean, they just, most places aren't looking for ways to add golf courses right now and spend more money on golf courses. It's just not the common theme going across the country right now. So right now, if you're looking at, let's say you're a business owner and you own all these different things and golf courses is one of them, and you're like trying to prioritize which one is just taking money away from me and which ones are making money, and you're prioritizing which ones do I cut and which ones do I keep. It's pretty rare that golf courses are one of those things that are moving the needle from a revenue standpoint, profit margin wise.
I guarantee when they have tournaments coming up. So I'm looking every day to see when and where I can play my pro events, and I guarantee it's going to be as soon as that says enter, they're going to be sold out because everyone wants to get out on that golf course and try and make the money back that they've lost.
Yeah, possibly.
Yeah, once again, though, I mean, that's a small piece of the overall puzzle.
For sure,
tournaments at a course. I mean, what it comes down to is beer and food and alcohol and all the other services and amenities, because it's kind of like when you sell an app, right, or give away an app for free. They're not making money off the app. They're making money off these kids that are playing it and going, hey, I need to buy an extra 1,500 gold to be able to buy this whatever the hell it is, right? It's on the upcharges, and that's typical with any business, and golf is not much different than that.
I was going to say restaurants are in the same boat, that they're losing a lot of revenue because they're not able to sell alcohol. And some states have relaxed that rule that you can go up to the Mexican place up here and bring home a 32-ounce margarita. So they've relaxed rules you can take home. But that's almost the backbone of a lot of businesses, is being able to sell alcohol, and golf courses are not excluded from that.
Well, there are going to be, and somebody commented on Twitter that for many courses, and this is absolutely true, food and beverage is actually they lose money on the deal, right? Because you pay these premium membership fees, the more expensive clubs, and every day there's a breakfast buffet and a lunch buffet and an elaborate spread and all this stuff that is baked into the membership fee, but is the membership fee is what it is to offset kind of all that stuff. So in those situations, if the members are playing golf, they might actually come out ahead because they're not spending all the money on food. But I think for a lot of the smaller and mid-tier clubs, which is, I would argue still the heart of golf, if not the munis, right? It's going to be, I think this is going to prove to be a very,
it's
very
good,
event.
Good and bad, right? It's going to force people to maybe coming out of this shift to models like the GOAT, or whatever it is, right? Where you think about how golf is and you shift and pivot a little bit, it's forcing the hand a little bit to make changes that might help save you for the future.
Yeah, I thought about that, this idea, right? The Goat Hill Park is kind of billed as a community golf course, right? Where it's, golf is kind of what brings everybody there, but there's lots of ancillary cool stuff that goes on, and people just come to chill and hang out and have a good time and be
cool
with
hang.
friends and family. Yeah, and so how do you bring that vibe to a golf course that was private or semi-private?
Ain't many golf
like
courses
that
right now got a cool hang vibe, man.
Right. Yeah. So and how do you? I don't know how you develop that culture necessarily, but I think if you're a struggling golf course looking for a successful model that can carry down the road, yeah, man, make your golf course the central part of a community.
Yep.
Let's put a nightclub in there, a pole.
Well, look,
I mean,
it's common sense, right?
It's
Look
not
at Goat
that
Hill
kind
Park.
of community, Harry.
Look at Goat Hill Park.
It's not
Look
a
at Goat Hill
community.
Park. Take things from Top Golf. Take things from like the par 3 environment. But, those are things that everybody's like, hey, yeah, man, I'll go play a par 3. Even non-golfers will do that, but turn it into golf,
to the
right?
Non-golfers.
I mean, yeah, and I think you got to do that. Like, my course the last couple of years has run over the winter and even in the summer a couple of big cornhole tournaments, which I'm like, I'm still like, I can't believe adult beanbag toss is a thing, but whatever. But it was like highly, highly successful, a lot of interest, a lot of turnout, a lot of beers, that kind of thing. And obviously you can't do that right now. I mean, maybe you could, if you're, probably touching the beanbags doesn't work. Yeah,
and it's short term, but it's also short term, long term stuff, right? Like all these are great ideas potentially, but like if you look at Goat Hill, that kind of developed a little bit organically too, right? Like it's a cultural thing, and you can't turn culture. It's not a light switch you can turn on and off. And you can't do it in response to a pandemic. Like, hey, this is a great idea. So we're going to create this really cool organic culture, and it's going to open at 8:00 this Saturday.
You can't force it, but if you don't build the infrastructure for it, it will never happen.
Well, and it takes a lot of passionate people behind it too.
If you don't make any noise, how are you ever going to get heard?
Deep Tips by Harry Nodwell.
Boom.
Here we go.
Do you ever escape the BallLab to go play video games? Anybody? I know you don't play video games.
I've been playing a lot of Hitman lately. Hitman 2.
Okay.
I know. Tony and I were talking when this whole thing happened. He's like, man, I haven't played video games in a long time. He's like, I'm going to buy a game. I said, go for it. Hitman it was. And he's been playing a lot of it, he said.
It wasn't the PGA Tour 2K21?
Not yet. But
No?
I remember playing Tiger Woods.
Well, that's what I'm hearing, that the PGA Tour 2K21 is the best game since the Tiger game, right?
Well, it's the only
Tiger game is the legend.
It's the only game, okay.
Tiger Woods was decent.
Yeah,
But
so
it's
like
gotten some good
video games haven't taken golf very seriously, and to be honest with you, maybe they're not too wrong, but they had the Tiger game, and then they had the Rory McIlroy game, and I think in 2014, and I think this comes out like May 14th, and it's got a teaser video that looks pretty damn good.
All right. Is it going to turn any of you into gamers? For my sake, I hope not you.
I'm bored of games.
You don't play FIFA?
I played a couple of times, and I am terrible at FIFA.
Really?
I'm just bad at video games in general. I'm one of those people that if I have the controller, I'll sit there and I feel like the harder I press the button, the faster the little guy's going to run. And that's not how it works. So I end up
doing this?
And if I'm driving Mario Kart, for sure.
Now, give me a Mario Kart, and I'm all game for it, as long as I've got a couple of beers inside me and I get to do it.
Hey, that's Tony, Chris, do you guys remember the Nintendo Summer Olympics?
Yes.
And using like the pin top to put your fingers on either side of the AMP.
Yes, I remember that. And I don't have time for video games because it cuts into I like to spend a lot of time hand rolling all my burritos. And so it cuts into that time and my hot tub time. So
I just remember a thing called Nintendo Thumb. Does anybody remember that?
Oh, yeah. Your thumb would be all,
Thumb would be all jacked up.
My video game experience was on the N64, and that like exclusively. And that was about it.
What was your favorite game?
Mario Party. For sure. Yeah. I'm terrible at Mario Kart.
I was a big Legend of Zelda guy.
Ooh.
I used to love Zelda.
Were you into Warhammer too?
What's that?
Were you into Warhammer too?
Not as much into the Warhammer. I still remember up, down, left, right, BA, select, start. Was that Contra? That was Contra, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'll tell you a quick story
Contra
about Legend of Zelda. My brother was 7 years older than I was, and we were a little bit reckless as kids. And he pulled the Ferris Bueller trick and called in as my dad to the school the day Legend of Zelda got out, and got me out of school and picked me up. Kind of had a hooded thing on so no one could see who he was. I rolled out. We went and picked up Zelda, played it. We stuck it in. And I'll never forget when that thing popped up. I looked at the graphics and I looked at my brother and I was like, they are never going to get better than this at graphics. And he was like, you're right, man. Like, this is as good as it gets.
I said the same thing about the original Madden. I'm like, my God, this is as good as video football can ever be.
Yeah. All right. Well, so are we about wrapping up today?
God, I hope so. This is a long one.
Yeah, this was a good one. We had a lot to talk about today.
Yeah.
We'll see how a 15-hour podcast does on SoundCloud.
I'm telling you, man, people will watch 10 episodes of an hour-long show back to back to back, but nobody will watch a 10-hour movie. Why is that?
That's gotta get up a
solid question.
Now that's a deep tip right there.
On that note,
I need to figure that out.
All right, guys. Well, thanks a bunch. We'll see you next week.
we're out.
We out.
We out.